Hey, welcome to Fireside Technique. I am Jake Meeks, and normally on this show we focus exclusively on tattoo-related subjects because I myself am a tatty banger. I've been banging tatties for a long time. Sometimes I'll do like some sweet barbed wire around somebody's gun. Other times I've been known to do some knuckle bangers, little like fireside rules, that kind of stuff like that. Fireside rules. That actually doesn't work. The numbers are all, the math doesn't work on that. Today, we're gonna focus on a subject that directly relates to tattooing, and that is painting. And I'll tell you why we decided to make this episode. It was actually twofold. One, a while back, several months ago, we did a quick little technique on thumbnailing and how thumbnailing will make you a better tattooer. And by thumbnailing, we mean quick sketches, compositional sketches to determine the flow and the balance of dark and light shapes on the body, things like that. All the important stuff that leads to successful tattoos down the line. Well, that episode actually got a lot more attention than I would have ever guessed. I thought that one would fly right under the radar and 6 people would actually get something out of it, which is enough for me to do an episode, quite honestly. But to my surprise, there were a lot of people that got something out of that episode because we get a constant kind of stream of comments on it. We did some thumbnail templates that were, cheap giveaways, like $8 or $10 templates of body parts that people could download to use to do thumbnails on, and those things have been selling pretty well, which led me to believe that people are actually interested in thumbnails. So, couple that with the fact that I was going through some old footage and I came across myself laying out thumbnail drawings for a painting, actually this painting, drop the painting in right here. This painting that I did for a group show at Art Realm Gallery in Austin, Texas. The show was called Orbs, and they sent us all a bunch of round canvases to paint on. So I had recorded myself, for whatever reason, I actually don't remember why, I recorded myself doing thumbnail layouts for this painting. And there were a few challenges to this painting, or things that I thought that I could use in this painting, elements that I could use in this painting to make it more dynamic, and I wanted to test out by doing thumbnails. So, without further ado, here is my thumbnail series that led to the creation of this painting. I hope you enjoy it.
So here is my setup for the painting. It's the old grapefruit tied to the ceiling trick, the oldest trick in the book. And it's a pretty simple layout, obviously, just a couple of elements with a single light source. But as we pan around it, you'll see that there are actually a lot of different variables here. There are a lot of ways that I can present this composition and a lot of focal points that I have to choose from. So with that in mind, I went over to my thumbnail templates that I had already laid out, and I started to block some ideas in. Now I started here with the string. The string was actually a pretty important element to me from the start, just because I was trying to decide whether I wanted to drop the string directly down the middle of the canvas, the shape of the canvas, to split it in half, or whether I wanted to offset it. And ultimately, I decided that since this really couldn't be a symmetrical composition because of the knife hanging out of one side and the grapefruit that sat kind of crooked in the as it sat in the string, I decided to reinforce that idea by offsetting the string just slightly to one side or the other. And I think I kept that kind of all the way through. Another main concern that I had was the relationship of the two circles, the two orbs, meaning the shape of the canvas itself, which was an 8-inch round canvas, and the grapefruit. So those two I thought could have a pretty dynamic relationship. So in this first one, I actually looks like I chose to shrink the size of the grapefruit and reinforce the knife. So I'm looking at the handle of the knife as being a main element or a focal point in this layout. And that was something that I was kind of battling with back and forth the entire time. You'll see also I'm starting to block in the cast shadow on the wall, which I knew was going to be a main element no matter what, because it is the darkest shape and it's also one of the biggest shapes. It's really bold on the wall because of that strong single light source. So I knew that was a factor that I had to deal with And so my decision here was whether to make that secondary to the handle of the knife or to the grapefruit. And in this first layout, I chose the knife. Now I'm spending about 2 minutes each on these drawings. I don't want to go too far with any one drawing. 2 minutes seems to be enough time for me to block in the major shapes and determine my light source. I want to make sure that I don't get so far in that I feel too invested in any one drawing and then feel obligated to stick with it, even if it's not going well. I know I have that tendency where if I go so far with something, then I'll tend just to stick with it because I feel like I already have too much time invested. And I wanted to make sure by the time I got through all of these thumbnails that I was comfortable just scrapping the entire thing if I couldn't find a composition that I thought worked, because, you know, with 8 thumbnails here at 2 minutes each on the first pass, I'm only in for less than 20 minutes total. And if I couldn't find anything that would work, then that would be fine too. I could just trash it and set up a new composition. So in this second layout, I chose to let the grapefruit fall off of the canvas. And that's always something that I'm interested in, or something I'm playing with, is how the shapes relate to the edge of the picture plane. You can create some really interesting tension with how the major shapes relate to the edge of the plane, and with having both of these circles to deal with, both with the edge of the picture and the grapefruit itself. It was something I knew I wanted to play with. I think I was realizing pretty quickly that I didn't want it to fall completely off of the picture plane, but it is important to spend the full 2 minutes on each drawing and render them all to about the same level of finish, so that whenever I step back and look at all of my layouts, they all are kind of equal in how far that I got with them. That way I don't unfairly judge one, kind of above the other ones. Now here I'm playing with the blade of the knife, really pushing the edge of that canvas, kind of like tucking right up against it to see if I can create some interesting tension there. Another thing I should say is that I'm not actually changing the setup at all. I'm looking at my still life setup, but it's still lit from the opposite side, just the way that you saw it whenever we started this video. All I'm using it for, I'm kind of inventing these compositions. All that I'm using my still life for at this point is to determine what the potential focal points could be. So I'm looking at it and I'm looking at the light source. I'm looking at the cast shadow. I'm looking at the highlights on the grapefruit. I'm looking at the way the light hits the knife, and I'm using that to inform myself of potential hierarchies within the design. And then so I'm kind of inventing the design based off of the information that I'm getting from the still life, rather than constantly changing the light source and spinning the grapefruit and stuff like that. So in this one, I went with a super foreshortened view of the knife handle, so that I'm looking almost down at the handle. Again, I think this was one I knew pretty early on that I wasn't crazy about. It just looked too, too fake. It looked, it wasn't the effect that I was going for at all, but I still went ahead and finished it out to the same level as the others, even though I knew pretty early on that it wasn't something that I was interested in making a painting. So here I decided to change it up and look at a different knife. So if you remember, the knife in the actual setup is a wooden handle, and then I found this sterling silver knife, actually of my grandmother's. I found it at my grandmother's house and snatched it from her. And I knew, using this sterling silver with all the ornate patterns and the way that it catches light, that if I went with this knife, it would have to be the focal point. There'd be no way around it. I couldn't do all the fancy stuff that this knife requires and still render the grapefruit as far as I would want to. So the grapefruit would have to become secondary, and the knife would be kind of the dominant element in the painting. At least that's the way that I see it. I'm sure that some people can make it work. You still make the grapefruit a focal point. So I'm playing with the handle here, and then I realized that I've already set up a couple of handles this same way. So I went ahead and I changed it, I think, right about here. And I lay it kind of perpendicular to the way that the string is coming. So I'm almost like creating these geometric shapes here, like I'm slicing up a pie. So I wanted to play with the knife going straight at a diagonal from the direction that the string was coming from. It ended up being something that didn't work, but that's the kind of thing you never know until you start experimenting with it. So here, I actually ended up spinning my paper upside down just to make it work for the camera. That's not ideal. You can look at all the drawings on the bottom and see that they're all upside down now. Ideally, you draw everything with the paper pointing the same way so you can step back and look at everything together. But I wasn't able to do that, so I'm fighting a little bit of an uphill battle. But this one, I decided to make the grapefruit a little bit smaller than the one that is directly below it, but keep the entire grapefruit in the picture plane. But I kind of tucked it right against the edge of the canvas to create that tension there. And I think that this ended up being the thumbnail that I went with. Now, it changed throughout the course of the painting, but this was the basic layout that I ended up using. You can see I'm not really, trying to be super realistic with any of this stuff. Like the shape of the knife is just very simple cubes. The shape of the grapefruit is just really simple spheres. So I'm not worried about detail at all. In fact, my goal here is to make sure that it works in the most abstract way possible. So if it turns out that I needed to start using detail in the knife handle or highlights in the orange or textures here or there, then that would tell me that this composition wasn't strong enough to use. I need the abstract shapes to work completely on their own. You can see how much I'm generalizing here just by how the shadow shape of the grapefruit almost falls right into the cast shadow. I'm just kind of calling those one big shape at this point, even though they will get separated and defined as the painting develops. On this front end, my goal is just to really simplify the overall light and dark shapes. So it looks like on this one, I'm even pushing the knife handle further and really exaggerating it, almost making it kind of cartoony and kind of treating it like a third orb or a third sphere, the edge of the knife. Even though that knife is actually kind of squared off, I was kind of playing with just using spheres all the way through. And you can do that. You can always you can make this stuff whatever you want. Using visual reference is great, but it doesn't mean you have to make your drawing or painting look exactly like your visual reference. Now this one is a similar layout to the earlier one that I did, and I think that I had decided I liked the layout. I liked how the grapefruit sat in this one, but I was just slightly changing the angle of the knife. So that's an important thing. These thumbnails don't have to be completely different from each other. If you get 3 or 4 thumbnails in and realize that you like one particular direction, you can start making variations on that direction rather than continually doing brand new things. Like like I say, in this circumstance, I liked the placement of the grapefruit, but I wanted to test different placements of the knife and how the handle came out and the direction of the handle, maybe the cast shadow or the light source. You can always just change one variable or two. So once I get to the point that I have all of them laid out, about 2 minutes each, I go through and I mark out the ones I know I don't like. I circle the ones that I think I want to work further on, which is what I'm doing right here. And then I'll go back to those ones that I want to work a little further on, and I'll put another 3 minutes or so into each one. So my first pass, I had 8 drawings at about 2 minutes each, and then I narrow those down, and I come back to the ones that I wanted to work a little bit further, and I put another 3 or 4 minutes into each of those. Like I said earlier, I don't want to go too far. I don't want to start rendering a lot of detail. I still want them to be simple, abstract shapes, because that is that's the point of thumbnailing. I don't want to get too far into detail and start trying to make the drawings fancy. I just need to make sure that the light and dark relationships are work, that the light source is consistent, that the darks and lights are balanced, that they sit well on the canvas or on the body. If you're doing this for a tattoo. So I'll come through, correct the drawing a little bit if I need to, because I'm going to use all this information when I lay out my painting. I might push my values a little bit more. So right here, I only have basically a medium gray and the white of the paper, but I'll come through and kind of darken a couple of areas like I am right here. Maybe get another value or two, maybe push it to 3 or 4 total values rather than just the 2 values that I started with. And then the last thing I'll do here is I come in and I kind of lightly lay the background in an effort to push my strongest light forward, which is the highlight on the grapefruit. So when I had that background super light, it was kind of competing with the light in the grapefruit. And here I'm pushing it just a little bit further, making sure that this is what I want. I guess at this point I thought that this was going to be the composition that I went with, but it ended up not being. But most likely I put this same amount of work into the other composition that I did end up going with. So I've probably got 5 or 6 total minutes in these last couple of drawings. And from here, I used this reference and went on and started blocking in the basic shapes of my painting. And I had most of my biggest problems already solved before I even laid paint on canvas.
So, pretty anticlimactic, I know. Climatic. What am I trying to say? Pretty boring stuff, I know, but that's what thumbnailing is, honestly. It's about putting in a little bit of work on the front end so that you avoid wasting a lot of time on the back end. There's really nothing worse than getting 6 or 8 hours into a drawing, especially some big back piece or sleeve, and realizing that you were going down the wrong path to begin with, or that you could have chosen a more dynamic composition, or even worse than that, you get into the actual tattoo and then find that you could have done something better. So go ahead, put 20 minutes into some thumbnail sketches on the front end, and it's not really about what's right and what's wrong, it's about what's appealing to you, because you're the one that has to finish the drawing, right? I mean, so, you know, you lay out 6 thumbnail sketches on an arm, and you go and you step back and you squint and you go, which of those shapes are the most appealing to me? There's not necessarily a right or a wrong. There are some basic rules that you might want to follow as far as the balance between dark and light shapes or flowing with the body, but ultimately it's just up to what you like, what appeals to you. And the best way to determine that is just to continually do these little thumbnails and make that decision for yourself. Thank you, as always, for supporting what we do. I love you, each and every one, and we will see you next time on Fireside Technique.